that he saved a baby dragon. Part 1. Marcus Chen had always been told that humans didn't belong in the Outer Rim territories. The Galactic Council made it clear that Earth's newest members should stick to their designated sectors, far from the ancient civilizations that had ruled space for millennia. But Marcus was a xenobiologist, and his research on endangered species had brought him to Draconis Prime, despite the warnings. The planet's crimson forests stretched endlessly beneath twin purple suns, and the air hummed with an energy that made his human nerves tingle. He'd been studying the local ecosystem for 3 weeks now, documenting creatures that most of the galaxy had forgotten existed. The Draconic Empire that once ruled this world had fallen centuries ago, leaving behind ruins and legends that few dared to explore. Marcus was collecting soil samples near an ancient temple when he heard it, a weak, pitiful crying that cut through the forest silence. The sound was unlike anything he'd encountered before, part whistle, part roar, but small and desperate. His universal translator couldn't identify the source, which meant it was either too alien or too young to register properly. Following the sound deeper into the temple ruins, Marcus climbed over fallen stones covered in symbols that seemed to shift and glow when he wasn't looking directly at them. The crying grew stronger, more urgent. He pushed through a gap between 2 massive pillars and found himself in a circular chamber with a pool of what looked like liquid starlight at its center. There, trapped on a small island of stone in the middle of the glowing pool, was the most extraordinary creature Marcus had ever seen. It was no bigger than a house cat, with scales that shifted from deep emerald to brilliant gold in the strange light. Its wings were torn and bleeding, and one of its tiny legs was clearly broken. But what struck Marcus most were its eyes, ancient, intelligent, and filled with pain and terror. A baby dragon. Marcus had read about them in the old texts, creatures of legend that the Draconic Empire had revered above all else. They were said to be extinct, hunted to death by rival species who feared their power. Yet here one was, alone, and dying in this forgotten place. The pool between them glowed brighter as Marcus approached, and he could feel the energy radiating from the liquid. His instruments went crazy, detecting radiation levels that should have been lethal. The baby dragon tried to lift its head toward him, making that heartbreaking cry again. Marcus knew the smart thing would be to leave. Dragons, even baby ones, were supposed to be incredibly dangerous. The Galactic database listed them as a Class X threat, with warnings about their psychic abilities and their tendency to imprint violently on other species. Every rational part of his mind screamed at him to walk away. Instead, he started looking for a way across the pool. The liquid starlight was clearly some kind of energy field, probably a defense mechanism left by the ancient Draconics. Marcus tested it with his equipment and discovered it was designed to repel most known alien species. But humans had never been tested because they hadn't existed in space when the temple was built. Taking a deep breath, Marcus stepped into the glowing pool. The energy hit him like ice and fire at the same time. Every nerve in his body screamed and his vision went white. But he pushed forward, step by agonizing step, until he reached the small island where the baby dragon waited. Up close, the creature was even more magnificent and pitiful. Its scales were warm to the touch, and Marcus could feel the rapid flutter of its tiny heart. When he gently picked it up, the dragon stopped crying and looked at him with those ancient eyes, as if seeing something that surprised it. Getting back across the pool was harder with the injured creature in his arms, but Marcus managed it. Once they were on solid ground, he immediately started treating the dragon's wounds with his medical kit. The broken leg was easy enough to splint, and the torn wing membrane could be sealed with bioadhesive. But the creature was severely dehydrated and malnourished. As Marcus worked, he noticed something strange. The dragon's scales were changing color, shifting from the original emerald and gold to include traces of brown, the exact shade of Marcus's hair. and when he looked into its eyes, he saw something that made his breath catch: recognition, gratitude, and something else, a connection that felt deeper than anything he'd ever experienced. The baby dragon had imprinted on him. Marcus knew what this meant from the old texts. Dragon imprinting was supposed to be irreversible, creating a bond that lasted for life. In the ancient Draconic Empire, only the royal family had been allowed to raise bonded dragons, and the practice had been surrounded by ceremony and tradition. But those were just stories from dead civilizations. This was real. Over the next few days, as Marcus nursed the baby dragon back to health in his research camp, he began to understand just how real. The creature, he'd started calling it Ember because of how its scales glowed when it was happy, displayed intelligence that far exceeded anything in the galactic databases. It learned to understand his words within hours, and its own vocalizations seemed to carry meaning beyond simple animal communication. More unsettling was the way Ember seemed to know things it couldn't possibly know. It would react to dangers before Marcus's instruments detected them, warning him away from unstable ground or poisonous plants with urgent chirps and wing flaps. Sometimes Marcus caught it staring at him with an expression that seemed almost protective. On the 5th day, Ember's wing had healed enough for short flights. The little dragon celebrated by performing aerial loops around the camp, its joyful cries echoing through the forest. Marcus watched with amazement and growing concern. Ember was getting stronger, more confident, and he was starting to wonder what would happen when it was fully grown. Dragons in the old stories were the size of starships. That evening, as Marcus sat by his campfire with Ember curled up in his lap like a scaly cat, his comm unit began receiving signals. Multiple ships were entering the system, their energy signatures unlike anything in his database. The readings were massive, powerful, and heading straight for Draconis Prime. Ember lifted its head, scales shifting to a deep red that Marcus had learned meant danger or anger. The little dragon looked up at the stars and let out a sound Marcus had never heard before, a complex musical roar that seemed to carry across impossible distances. Within minutes, Marcus's instruments detected response calls from the approaching ships. The same musical language, but deeper, more powerful, carrying harmonics that made the ground beneath his feet vibrate. Ember chirped softly and nuzzled against Marcus's chest, as if trying to comfort him. But there was something in the baby dragon's eyes that hadn't been there before. Anticipation mixed with what looked almost like pride. As the first of the massive ships broke through the cloud cover, their hulls gleaming with the same shifting colors as Ember's scales, Marcus realized the truth that would change everything. The dragons weren't extinct, and they were coming home. The ships descended like falling stars, each one the size of a city and shaped like the ancient dragons of legend. Their approach was silent, except for that haunting musical communication that resonated in Marcus's bones. Ember trembled with excitement in his arms, responding to each call with its own tiny voice. Marcus's hands shook as he held his first aid kit, suddenly aware of how inadequate his human medicine must have seemed compared to whatever advanced healing these ancient beings possessed. He'd been treating a baby dragon with supplies meant for cuts and bruises, not realizing he was caring for what might be the galactic equivalent of royalty. The largest ship landed first, its massive form settling onto the forest floor with impossible grace. The trees bent but didn't break, as if the ship's landing systems were designed to preserve rather than destroy. Other ships took positions around the temple ruins, their presence transforming the forgotten archaeological site into what looked like a reunion of titans. Ember struggled to fly from Marcus's arms, but the human gently held the little dragon close. "Easy, little one," he whispered, though his own voice was tight with fear. "Let's see what your family wants to say about a human raising their baby." The largest ship's hull began to open with a sound like singing crystal, and Marcus got his first glimpse of adult dragons in over 3 centuries. They were even more magnificent than the legends described, beings of such presence and power that the air itself seemed to bend around them. Their scales reflected light like living jewels, and their eyes held intelligence that made Marcus feel very small and very young. The first dragon to emerge was massive beyond imagination, its head alone larger than Marcus's entire research vessel. When it looked at him, Marcus felt the weight of eons in that gaze. This was clearly the leader, ancient beyond human comprehension and carrying an authority that needed no words. But it was Ember's reaction that surprised Marcus most. Instead of flying to its family, the little dragon pressed closer to Marcus, chirping softly and spreading one tiny wing across the human's chest in what was unmistakably a protective gesture. The baby dragon was trying to protect him from its own kind. He saved a baby dragon. Part 2. The ancient dragon's gaze fixed on Marcus with an intensity that made his skin prickle. Around the clearing, dozens of other dragons had emerged from their ships, creating a circle of living legends. Their scales caught the light of the twin suns, creating a rainbow of colors that hurt to look at directly. Some were sleek and serpentine, others broad and powerful, but all shared that same ageless intelligence in their eyes. Marcus stood frozen as the massive leader approached, each step making the ground tremble. Ember chirped frantically and pressed against him, scales flickering between protective red and worried blue. The little dragon seemed torn between wanting to greet its family and shielding the human who had saved its life. When the ancient dragon stopped just a few meters away, Marcus could feel the heat radiating from its enormous form. Its head lowered until those huge eyes were level with his own, and Marcus found himself staring into depths that seemed to contain starlight. The creature's nostrils flared as it took in his scent, and Marcus held his breath, waiting for judgment. Then the dragon spoke, its voice a harmony of sounds that Marcus felt in his chest rather than heard with his ears. His universal translator struggled with the ancient language before finally producing words. "Human child," the dragon said, each word carefully measured. "You carry our youngling. You smell of our sacred pool's energy. How do you live when all others would burn?" Marcus swallowed hard, acutely aware that his next words might determine whether he lived or died. I found Ember trapped in the temple. The pool's energy hurt, but I couldn't leave a baby to die. A ripple of movement went through the gathered dragons. Some reared back in what looked like surprise, while others leaned forward with renewed interest. The leader's eyes widened, showing more gold in their depths. "Ember," the ancient one repeated, "you have named our youngling?" "I had to call it something," Marcus said, then immediately worried that might have been offensive. "I didn't know if it had a name already or if I was supposed to—" The leader's massive head turned slightly, and Marcus heard what sounded like a conversation in the dragon's musical language. Other voices joined in, creating a complex harmony that seemed to debate and question. Ember added its own small voice to the discussion, chirping urgently and spreading both wings toward its family as if trying to explain something important. The conversation continued for several minutes, during which Marcus noticed something peculiar. The adult dragons kept looking at him with expressions he couldn't quite read. There was surprise, yes, but also something that looked almost like approval. Finally, the leader's attention returned to Marcus. "Our youngling tells us much, human child. It speaks of your kindness, your gentleness, your protection, even when you knew not what you protected. But most interesting, it tells us you crossed the sacred pool of testing." "Testing?" Marcus echoed. Another dragon, this one smaller but no less impressive, stepped forward. Its scales were silver and blue, and its voice was slightly higher than the leader's. The sacred pool was created by our ancestors as a trial for those who would bond with our kind. For 3,000 years, no being has been able to cross its barriers. The energy burns flesh and breaks minds. Even we cannot pass through it without great pain and preparation. Marcus felt a chill of understanding. You mean it was designed to keep people out? Not people, the leader corrected. It was designed to test worthiness, to separate those who would take our young for power from those who would risk everything to save a life. The pool reads intent, human child. It knows the true heart of those who enter. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. You're saying it was a test? That the whole thing was not planned, the silver dragon interrupted. Our youngling's presence there was accident. A crash during its learning flight, a mishap that led to injury and entrapment. But your response to finding it trapped, that was choice. Pure choice. Made from pure heart. Ember chirped and nuzzled against Marcus's neck, and he absently stroked the little dragon's head. Anyone would have done the same thing, he said quietly. The response from the gathered dragons was immediate and overwhelming, a sound that was part laughter, part singing, and part something Marcus couldn't identify. The leader's enormous head shook slowly from side to side. No, human child. In our long history, many have found our young in distress. Pirates seeking to sell dragon slaves, scientists wanting to study our genetics, warriors hoping to steal our power, collectors desiring living trophies. All heard our children's cries. None chose pain for themselves to ease another's suffering. Marcus looked around at the circle of ancient beings, finally beginning to understand why they were all staring at him. You're saying I'm the first? The first in 3,000 years to pass the sacred test, the leader confirmed. The first to prove worthy of the bond our youngling has chosen to give you. Bond? Marcus's voice cracked slightly. He'd read about dragon bonds in the historical texts, but hearing it confirmed by actual dragons made it real in a way that terrified him. But I'm just a researcher. I study animals. I don't know anything about dragons or bonds or ancient tests. The silver dragon moved closer, its eyes kind but serious. Knowledge can be taught, human child. Character cannot. You have shown character that our ancestors would have honored. The question now is whether you will accept what our youngling offers. Marcus looked down at Ember, who was watching him with those ancient eyes. The little dragon's scales had settled into a warm gold color that Marcus had learned meant contentment and hope. What exactly does accepting mean? It means becoming part of our clan, the leader said simply. It means learning our ways, our history, our responsibilities. It means protecting not just our youngling, but understanding your role in something much larger. And if I refuse? The leader's expression softened, becoming almost gentle. Then we thank you for saving our child's life. We take our youngling home to heal properly, and we remember forever the human who showed such kindness. There would be no dishonor in such a choice. Marcus felt Ember tense against him. The little dragon made a soft, worried sound and looked up at him with eyes that seemed to beg him not to leave. That look decided everything. What do I need to know? Marcus asked. The reaction was immediate and extraordinary. Every dragon in the clearing lifted their heads and released a harmonious roar that shook the trees and sent local wildlife fleeing for cover. The sound wasn't threatening. It was pure celebration, a song of joy that seemed to resonate with the planet itself. The leader stepped back and spread its enormous wings, and Marcus saw that they were marked with patterns that seemed to move and shift in the light. Welcome to Clan Starfire, Marcus Chen of Earth, the ancient dragon said formally. You are no longer just human. You are dragon friend, bond keeper, sacred guardian. How do you know my full name? Marcus asked, startled. The silver dragon's head tilted in what might have been amusement. Our youngling learned much while you slept. Dragon minds touch all things around them when they feel safe. It saw your identification, your research, your purpose here. It knows you better than you might think. Ember chirped and scrambled up to perch on Marcus's shoulder, tiny claws gripping his shirt for balance. The little dragon pressed its warm snout against Marcus's cheek and made a sound that needed no translation, pure, absolute trust. There is much to learn, the leader continued. Our history, our enemies, our role in the galaxy. The clan has been in hiding for centuries, but perhaps it is time for that to change. You represent something new, Marcus Chen, a bridge between the old ways and the new galaxy. Marcus felt the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders alongside Ember's small form. What about the Galactic Council? Humans are barely members. If they find out about this, they will learn, the Silver Dragon said with quiet confidence, that some bonds transcend politics, and perhaps they will understand that humans are more remarkable than even they know. As the sun began to set over Draconis Prime, casting the clearing in shades of gold and crimson, Marcus realized his quiet research mission had become something he could never have imagined. Around him, the ancient dragons began to sing, a complex harmony that seemed to welcome him into something vast and eternal. Ember added its small voice to the song, and somehow Marcus found himself humming along, his human voice finding a place in the dragon harmony. It shouldn't have worked, but it did, creating something new and beautiful. The first human in 3 millennia to bond with a dragon, welcomed into a clan thought extinct, about to learn secrets that could change the galaxy, and it had all started with refusing to let a baby die alone. He saved a baby dragon. Part 3. 3 months later, Marcus stood on the observation deck of the massive dragon ship Celestial Wing, watching as Earth grew larger in the view screen. Ember perched on his shoulder, now twice the size it had been when they first met, its scales shimmering with excitement as it saw its bondmate's homeworld for the first time. The journey from Draconis Prime had been unlike anything Marcus could have imagined. He'd lived among the dragons, learning their history, their customs, and most importantly, the true scope of what his bond with Ember meant. The dragons weren't just an ancient species hiding in the outer rim, they were guardians, protectors of younger races who were still learning to navigate the complex and often dangerous galaxy. "You are nervous, Bond brother," Ember said, its mental voice now clear and strong in Marcus's mind. The little dragon had grown not just in size, but in psychic ability, and their bond had deepened into something that went beyond simple communication. "A little," Marcus admitted, reaching up to gently stroke Ember's neck. "My species isn't exactly known for making good first impressions with new alien contacts." Behind them, ancient Starkeeper, the massive leader Marcus had first met in the temple clearing, chuckled with a sound like distant thunder. "From what we have learned of human history, young Marcus, your species excels at adaptation and surprising others. Today will be no different." Marcus hoped the ancient dragon was right. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of learning and growing. He'd discovered that dragon bonds were more than emotional connections. They were symbiotic relationships that enhanced both partners. Ember's rapid growth was partly due to the psychic stability Marcus provided, while Marcus found his own mind expanding in ways he'd never thought possible. He could sense electromagnetic fields now, see energy patterns invisible to normal human vision, and his reflexes had improved dramatically. The dragons explained that bonded humans in the ancient times had been formidable warriors and wise counselors, their human creativity enhanced by dragon wisdom and power. But the real revelation had been the dragons' role in galactic affairs. They weren't hiding from shame or fear. They were watching, protecting, guiding younger species through the careful early stages of interstellar civilization. The Draconic Empire hadn't fallen. It had evolved into something more subtle and far-reaching. "Ships approaching, Ancient One," called a younger dragon from the navigation station. 12 vessels, including what appears to be the human fleet's flagship. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. The dragons had sent messages ahead requesting an audience with Earth's government and the Galactic Council representatives stationed there. The response had been complicated. Humanity was still so new to galactic politics that the sudden appearance of a legendary species claiming friendship with one of their researchers had caused quite a stir. "Remember," Starkeeper said gently, "you are not on trial, young Marcus. We are here to introduce ourselves properly and to correct certain misconceptions that have persisted for far too long." The communication system crackled to life with a transmission from the approaching human fleet. "Unknown vessels, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Earth Defense Force. Identify yourselves and state your intentions." Marcus blinked in surprise. "Chen? Admiral Sarah Chen?" Ember tilted its head curiously. "You know this voice, Bond brother?" "That's my aunt," Marcus said weakly. "My father's sister. She's been commanding the Earth Defense Force for the past 5 years. Starkeeper's massive head swiveled toward Marcus, eyes glittering with what might have been amusement. The patterns of destiny weave themselves in interesting ways. Do they not? The dragon leader activated the communication system with a gentle touch of one enormous claw. When he spoke, his voice was formal but warm. "Admiral Sarah Chen of Earth, I am ancient Starkeeper of Clan Starfire. We come in peace and friendship, carrying with us your nephew Marcus Chen, who has become bond brother to one of our young. We request permission to meet with your leaders and representatives of the Galactic Council." The silence that followed stretched for nearly a minute. When Admiral Chen's voice returned, it was tight with controlled shock. "Did you just say, my nephew? Marcus is supposed to be conducting xenobiology research in the Outer Rim." "He was," Marcus said, taking over the communication. "Hi, Aunt Sarah, it's me, and I have a lot to explain." Another pause, shorter this time. "Marcus Chen, when you get over here, you are in so much trouble. Stand by for boarding clearance." The next few hours were a blur of formal introductions and barely controlled chaos. The human delegation that boarded the Celestial Wing included not just Admiral Chen, but also representatives from the Galactic Council, Earth's top xenobiologists, and more military officials than Marcus could count. The humans' first sight of ancient Starkeeper was everything Marcus had expected and more. Several officials actually stumbled backward, and one of the Galactic Council representatives, a purple-skinned Zalarian, made a sound that Marcus's translator rendered as impossible in 17 languages. But it was Ember who really stole the show. The young dragon had grown large enough to be impressive without being overwhelming, and its natural curiosity and playful nature quickly won over even the most nervous officials. When Ember performed a small aerial display in the ship's main bay, complete with harmless light bursts that painted rainbow patterns in the air, even Admiral Chen couldn't suppress a smile. "Okay," Marcus's aunt said finally. "I admit it. That's the most amazing thing I've ever seen. But Marcus, do you have any idea what kind of diplomatic incident you've potentially created?" "Actually," said the Zalarian Council representative, who had introduced herself as Coordinator Vash, "this may be the most significant positive development in galactic relations in the past century." All eyes turned to her, and she gestured toward ancient Starkeeper with obvious respect. The dragons were the first species to achieve true galactic civilization. Their technology, their wisdom, their peaceful expansion across the galaxy, they're legendary. Every species has stories about them. We thought they were extinct. "Not extinct," Starkeeper rumbled. "Evolved. For 3,000 years we have watched and guided from shadows. We have prevented wars, redirected aggressive species, and protected developing civilizations from those who would exploit them. but perhaps it is time for a more direct approach. Coordinator Vash leaned forward eagerly. What do you mean? We mean, said another dragon, this one with scales that shifted from blue to silver, that humanity represents something new. Your species shows remarkable potential for growth, creativity, and moral development, and now you have proven something we have long hoped to see again. Which is? Admiral Chen asked. Ancient Starkeeper looked directly at Marcus and Ember. That the ancient bonds can form again, that different species can join together not for conquest or exploitation, but for mutual growth and protection. Marcus and Ember are the first new bond in 3 millennia, but we believe they will not be the last. The implications hit everyone in the room simultaneously. If humans could bond with dragons, it would change everything about humanity's place in the galaxy. There would be training, Starkeeper continued. Careful selection, years of preparation. Bonding cannot be forced. It must grow naturally from shared respect and genuine care. But if your species is willing, we would be honored to begin that process. Admiral Chen looked at her nephew, who was quietly communicating with Ember through their mental link. Marcus, are you absolutely certain about this? Because once we say yes to this, there's no going back. This changes everything for our entire species. Marcus met his aunt's eyes, then looked around at the assembled officials, the dragons, and finally down at Ember, who chirped softly and nuzzled his hand. 3 months ago, I was just a researcher who couldn't leave a baby to die. Now I'm part of something bigger than I ever imagined. And honestly, I think humanity is ready for this. We've always been at our best when we're taking care of others. Coordinator Vash stepped forward, her expression serious but hopeful. Speaking for the Galactic Council, I believe this partnership could usher in a new era of cooperation and peace. The dragon's wisdom combined with human innovation and compassion. The possibilities are extraordinary. Ancient Starkeeper spread his massive wings, and the other dragons followed suit, creating a living canopy of scales and starlight. Then let it begin, the Ancient One declared. Let the bonds form anew, and let the galaxy see what wonders can emerge when species choose to grow together rather than apart. Ember launched itself from Marcus's shoulder and performed a joyful spiral through the air, its happy cries echoing off the ship's walls. Other young dragons emerged from hidden alcoves where they'd been watching, adding their own voices to the celebration. As Marcus watched the young dragons playing together, he realized that what had started as a simple rescue had become the first step in humanity's true acceptance into the galactic community. Not as junior members or barely tolerated newcomers, but as partners in something ancient and noble. Admiral Chen put her hand on her nephew's shoulder. You saved more than just one baby dragon, Marcus. You might have saved us all. Marcus smiled, feeling Ember's contentment through their bond and knowing that this was just the beginning of an adventure that would span generations. Sometimes, he said, watching the dragons dance through the starlight, the smallest acts of kindness have the biggest consequences. And in the harmony that filled the ship as dragons and humans began the first tentative steps of a friendship that would reshape the galaxy, everyone present knew they were witnessing the birth of something unprecedented and wonderful. The age of dragon-bonded humans had begun again, and the stars themselves seemed to sing with possibility.